Salam sejahtera, Anda bersama Nina Rozman dan ini Niaga AWANI. Parlimen Iran telah meluluskan langkah untuk menutup Selat Hormuz kepada laluan trafik tentera laut susulan serangan Amerika Syarikat ke atas 3 kemudahan nuklear. Perkara itu dimaklumkan seorang penggubal undang-undang kanan pada Ahad, anggota Suruhanjaya Keselamatan Negara Parlimen, Major General Ismail Kausari, dalam kenyataan yang disiarkan oleh Press TV milik kerajaan berkata, Parlimen telah mencapai kesimpulan bahawa Selat Hormuz perlu ditutup dan keputusan muktamad mengenai perkara itu terletak pada Majlis Keselamatan Tertinggi Negara. Majlis Keselamatan Tertinggi Negara merupakan pihak berkuasa keselamatan tertinggi di Iran. Selat Hormuz dianggap pintu masuk terpenting dunia untuk pengangkutan minyak. Ketegangan yang semakin memuncak antara Iran dan Israel bukan sahaja mengheret rantau Asia Barat ke ambang konflik, malah mencetuskan persoalan besar, adakah tenaga kini telah menjadi senjata dalam perang geopolitik moden. Dan dalam episod kali ini kita akan meneliti bagaimana konflik ini termasuk sekatan perdagangan, kedudukan strategik Selat Hormuz dan kemungkinan pelibatan kuasa besar seperti Amerika Syarikat bukan sahaja mengancam kestabilan bekalan tenaga dunia, tapi juga berpotensi memberi kesan limpahan kepada negara seperti Malaysia. Dengan itu saya mempersilakan tetamu untuk mengulas lebih lanjut adalah Dr. Muhammad Afzal Nizam Abdul Rashid, merupakan Ketua Ekonomi Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Dr. kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami. Kalau kita lihat ketegangan geopolitik semakin meningkat tanpa henti, namun sejauh mana konflik Iran-Israel ini memperlihatkan bahawa harga minyak kini bukan lagi semata-mata ditentukan oleh penawaran dan permintaan mengikut keadaan ataupun harga pasaran, tetapi juga sebagai senjata strategik dalam percaturan geopolitik global ini, Doktor.
Okey, baik Nina. Sebenarnya kalau kita melihat episod-episod yang lepas, sebenarnya kalau terdapat apa yang dikatakan sebagai kejutan ekonomi, itu akan berlakulah kenaikan harga minyak yang agak mendadak. Kalau kita melihat episod yang lalu pada tahun 2022, pada bulan Mac, harga minyak mentah Brent telah pun mencecah sekitar, tak salah saya, lebih kurang $128 setong. Perkara itu berlaku akibat daripada pembukaan ekonomi dan berlakunya ledakan permintaan, maka itu melonjakkan harga minyak mentah dunia lah. Dan sebelum itu kalau kita lihat pada tahun 2008, harga minyak mentah Brent mencecah kepada $146 setong, berikutan kebimbangan terhadap bekalan minyak pada ketika itu dikatakan kurang berbanding dengan permintaan. Jadi kejutan-kejutan ini jelas menunjukkan bahawa kesannya itu dapat dirasai melalui pergerakan harga minyak mentah dunia, dan sekarang kita berhadapan dengan situasi geopolitik yang kita tidak tahu bilakah titik noktahnya. Namun seperti yang disebut, harga minyak mentah dunia dan juga apa saja leverage lah pun digunakan oleh pihak-pihak tertentu untuk mendapat suatu bentuk leverage lah untuk mendapat satu objektif yang mahu dicapai. Jadi ini menimbulkan ketegangan ataupun kebimbangan terhadap apakah akan berlaku pada harga minyak mentah dunia. Seperti yang kita sedia maklum, Selat Hormuz ini sebenarnya laluan utama bagi negara-negara pengeluar minyak seperti Arab Saudi, UAE dan termasuk Iran juga, dan jika berlaku sekatan ataupun dipanggil sebagai choking point, berkemungkinan besar akan berlaku suatu gangguan terhadap bekalan harga minyak dunia. Dan kerana ia meliputi sekitar 20% ya bekalan minyak mentah dunia, jadi kalau berlaku gangguan, sudah pasti akan berlaku kejutan ekonomi yang sedang kita saksikan buat masa ini.
Dan kalau kita lihat kejutan ekonomi melihat kepada penyertaan ataupun campur tangan kuasa besar seperti Amerika Syarikat dalam konflik ini, kita tahu berpotensi menjadikan tenaga khususnya laluan Selat Hormuz sebagai medan perang ekonomi yang boleh menggugat kestabilan pasaran tenaga dunia secara drastik. Adakah ini akan mempercepatkan lagi? Bagaimana, Doktor?
Kalau kita lihat pihak World Bank dan IMF telah pun menyimak semula unjuran pertumbuhan ekonomi global. Pada ketika itu mereka risau ataupun bimbang terhadap dinamika situasi perang perdagangan ataupun perang tarif. Namun sekarang ini kita berhadapan dengan satu lagi kejutan, itu kejutan geopolitik yang memberi kesan langsung kepada harga minyak dunia. Jadi campur tangan oleh pihak kuasa besar seperti Amerika Syarikat, saya kira sudah pasti akan ada perkiraan mereka yang mana itu banyak berkenaan dengan faktor geopolitik, dan sudah pasti akan ada kesan sampingan ataupun retaliation daripada pihak yang terkesan seperti negara Iran, dan mereka menggunakan Selat Hormuz sebagai senjata mereka. Sama jugalah negara Amerika Syarikat yang menggunakan senjata tarif untuk mencapai objektifnya. Jadi dalam hal ni negara Iran juga ada objektifnya untuk dicapai. Jadi amat malang sekali lah menggunakan perkara ini sebagai suatu senjata untuk mencapai objektif yang mahu dicapai. Jadi kita sedang berhadapan satu ketidakpastian ekonomi yang agak besar juga impaknya kepada ekonomi global.
Sekatan perdagangan, gangguan bekalan dan premium risiko dalam pasaran minyak boleh dilihat sebagai bentuk perang ekonomi senyap yang memberi impak langsung terhadap pertumbuhan KDNK seperti Malaysia. Jadi bagaimana untuk kita melihat perkara-perkara yang berlaku di peringkat global di luar kawalan kita, khususnya kita tahu memberi impak kepada Malaysia walaupun pendedahan Malaysia kepada dagangan berada dalam skala yang agak kecil?
Dia memang ada kesan yang langsung, sudah pasti. Kalau kita melihat data berkenaan dengan perdagangan antarabangsa berkenaan dengan minyak mentah ataupun produk petroleum, Malaysia telah pun mencatatkan angka imbangan defisit untuk tempoh 3 tahun yang berturut-turut. Ini berarti kita banyak mengimport daripada mengeksport barangan berbentuk minyak mentah lah. Dan apabila berlaku kejutan ini, sudah pasti ia akan memberi kesan pada harga minyak dunia, dan secara langsung akan beri kesan pada kos untuk mengimport barangan tersebut. Dan dalam hal ini perkaitan yang langsung adalah berkenaan dengan subsidi ataupun kos subsidi yang bakal ditanggung oleh kerajaan sekiranya harga minyak kekal tinggi dalam keadaan tempoh masa yang agak panjang. Jadi ini menuntut suatu perkiraan ataupun tindak balas oleh pihak kerajaan bagaimana mereka harus meneruskan rancangan mereka untuk merasionalisasikan subsidi bahan api, memandangkan isu ini ataupun kejutan ekonomi ini di luar kawalan, dan tidak pasti apakah yang bakal kita saksikan berkenaan dengan dinamika antara perang Israel dan Iran ini.
Melihat kepada langkah-langkah mitigasi untuk kita menangani perkara ini, namun melihat kepada realitinya keupayaan kita, adakah kita masih terlalu bergantung kepada pasaran luar untuk kestabilan ekonomi?
Kalau kita melihat data berkenaan dengan nilai dagangan berbanding KDNK negara adalah sekitar 132%. Jadi apa sahaja yang berlaku di luar sana memang akan ada kesan langsung kepada ekonomi negara. Memang Malaysia merupakan sebuah negara yang begitu terbuka dari sudut perdagangan antarabangsanya dan juga dari segi aliran modal asing. Jadi inilah dua channel ataupun saluran utama bagaimana apa sahaja yang berlaku di luar sana akan beri kesan langsung, dan di sini menuntut pihak kerajaan untuk menilai apakah strategi yang seterusnya untuk menstabilkan pertumbuhan ekonomi negara, yang mana ekonomi domestik ini merupakan satu perkara yang di dalam kawalan kerajaan Malaysia untuk memastikan pertumbuhan ekonomi secara keseluruhan bagi tahun ini kekal dalam keadaan yang lebih baik lagi. Jadi saya percaya pihak kerajaan baik di Kementerian Kewangan dan juga pihak negara akan sentiasa memantau situasi yang kita alami pada masa ini dan apakah bentuk dasar yang bakal dilaksanakan, dan saya kira sudah pasti pendekatannya itu begitu fleksibel lah kerana isu ini di luar kawalan sebenarnya.
Dan sudah tentu pendekatan harus fleksibel kerana kita menjagakan ketidaktentuan yang berpanjangan. Melihat kepada peranan pula, apa antara peranan dasar luar dan diplomasi ekonomi Malaysia dalam memastikan negara tidak terperangkap dalam konflik blok kuasa besar ini? Kerana kita tahu bukan mudah untuk kekal neutral dan sebaliknya mampu mengambil peluang jangka pendek daripada kenaikan harga komoditi tanpa terdedah kepada risiko jangka panjang yang tidak menentu. Bukan mudah untuk balancing act ini. Bagaimana, Doktor?
Memang dasar luar ni satu perkara yang begitu dicey ataupun begitu sensitif untuk dibincangkan, tapi saya percaya pendekatan yang diamalkan oleh pihak kerajaan terutamanya berhadapan dengan situasi perang tarif yang dimulakan oleh pihak Amerika Syarikat dengan berbincang dan berunding merupakan satu langkah yang dikira langkah yang tepat, itu menggunakan diplomasi. Dan dalam kes perang berkenaan dengan Israel dan Iran ni, saya rasa jelas sekali kita memang kata tu tidak menyokonglah sebarang bentuk tindak balas yang bersifat menyejaskan dari segi terorisme dan sebagainya. Jadi itu pendirian yang telah pun saya kira telah lama diutarakan. Saya kira mengekalkan dasar luar sejadah ni memberikan satu bentuk konsistensi bagaimana Malaysia melihat dinamika yang kita sedang alami buat masa ini.
Dan kita harap dasar sedia ada dan langkah yang sedang dilakukan ini bukan saja dapat memastikan kestabilan ekonomi tapi dapat memastikan keamanan serantau. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Dr. Muhammad Azanizam Abdul Rashid merupakan Ketua Ekonomi Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad, dan setiap perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astro.com dan di semua platform digital Astro ni. Jangan ke mana-mana, banyak lagi laporan yang akan kami bawakan selepas ini.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Berteraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Mereka berjaya membuktikannya. Inovaton kembali. Jom sertai Inovaton musim ketiga. Jika anda ada idea menarik dan inovatif, sahut cabaran Inovaton. Anda berpeluang memenangi hadiah lumayan. Imbas kod QR tertera untuk pendaftaran. Dan sila hadirkan diri ke lokasi-lokasi berikut untuk membentangkan idea anda. Selamat mencuba. Moga berjaya. Tonjolkan idea inovasi anda yang terpendam selama ini.
Ringgit dijangka terus bertahan dalam julat terhad minggu ini. Berikutan peniaga dan pelabur akan kekal memantau perkembangan konflik di Asia Barat. Ketua Ahli Ekonomi Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad, Dr. Muhammad Azanizam Abdul Rashid berkata, konflik antara Israel dan Iran terus menjadi tumpuan utama. Indeks dolar Amerika susut 0.22% kepada 98.691 mata. Selain itu, data inflasi perbelanjaan penggunaan peribadi PCE bagi Mei 2025 juga dijangka dikeluarkan minggu ini. Berdasarkan situasi semasa, ringgit berkemungkinan diniagakan dalam julat RM4.24 hingga RM4.25. Bagi minggu yang baru berakhir, ringgit mengakhiri kenaikan awal susulan kebimbangan geopolitik yang meningkat sekaligus mendorong permintaan terhadap dolar Amerika sebagai mata wang selamat. Pada penutupan minggu lalu, ringgit diniagakan lebih lemah berpanding dolar Amerika susut kepada 4.2505 pada Jumaat berbanding 4.2435 minggu sebelumnya. Mata wang tempatan itu diniagakan kebanyakannya lebih tinggi berbanding kumpulan mata wang utama. Mata wang tempatan itu juga diniagakan kebanyakannya lebih tinggi berbanding mata wang ASEAN. Bursa Malaysia dijangka kekal mengalami dagangan secara berhati-hati dan prestasinya mungkin menjejaki pergerakan di Wall Street minggu ini. Ia memandangkan pasaran meneliti petunjuk daripada jawatan kuasa pasaran terbuka Rizab Persekutuan FOMC Amerika Syarikat. Ketua Penyelidikan Pelaburan UOB Kehian Wealth Advisors dan Berhad Muhammad Siddiq Jantal berkata unjuran Rizab Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat Fed yang mengambil kira kelembapan pertumbuhan, inflasi tinggi dan trajektori pengangguran meningkat bagi 2025 hingga 2027 menunjukkan stagflasi yang boleh menjejaskan sentimen risiko. Katanya sektor yang sensitif kepada pertumbuhan mungkin menghadapi cabaran memandangkan hala tuju dasar masih tidak menentu. Pemisahan plot titik FOMC dengan kalangan ahli terbahagi antara tiada pengurangan kadar faedah dengan 2 kali pengurangan menjelang akhir tahun menunjukkan pelonggaran dasar jangka masa pendek yang terhad sekaligus merendahkan kemungkinan pengurangan kadar pada Julai. Beliau berkata indeks penanda aras kini berlegar hampir kepada paras ambang psikologi 1,500 mata. Pergerakan indeks melepasi paras ini boleh mencetuskan pembelian secara peluang oleh pelabur institusi terutamanya apabila indeks menghampiri paras sokongan serta-merta 1,490 mata. Walaupun panduan FOMC memperkenalkan elemen berhati-hati, namun pasaran mungkin mendapat sokongan pada paras yang lebih rendah apabila penilaian menjadi lebih menarik. Ketidaktentuan ketara yang didorong oleh geopolitik lazimnya bersifat sementara dan serta berisiko dijangka menjadi sederhana apabila kebimbangan ini reda. Berdasarkan Jumaat ke Jumaat, indeks utama pasaran susut 15.37 mata kepada 1502.74 daripada 1518.11 pada minggu sebelumnya. Prestasi ekspor Malaysia mencatatkan penjusutan 2 bulan berturut-turut seperti yang dilaporkan dalam statistik perdagangan luar negeri bagi bulan Mei yang dikeluarkan oleh Jabatan Perakaan Malaysia. Nilai ekspor mencatatkan penurunan sebanyak 2.77% pada April, diikuti penurunan lebih ketara sebanyak 5.15% pada Mei. Meskipun ringgit menunjukkan pengukuhan, penurunan berterusan dalam ekspor menimbulkan kebimbangan dalam kalangan pelabur terhadap saham berorientasikan ekspor. Ini menimbulkan persoalan sama ada prestasi keuntungan korporat bagi suku ini akan terjejas dan perlukah pelabur terus memegang, membeli atau menjual. Dengan itu, kita mempersilakan tetamu yang sudah bersedia untuk menjawab semua persoalan tersebut adalah Muhammad Siddiq Jantan, Ketua Penyelidikan Pelaburan UOB, Kehian Wealth Advisor. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Siddiq kerana sudah meluangkan masa bersama kami. Sudah tentu apa yang berlaku di peringkat global ini akan memberikan kesan langsung terhadap pasaran kita dan ini akan mempengaruhi sentimen pelabur pada masa akan datang. Jadi mengapa penurunan ekspor 2 bulan berturut ini menjadi kebimbangan utama kebanyakan?
Okey, baik Nina. Kalau kita tengok penurunan ekspor selama 2 bulan berturut-turut bukan sahaja mencerminkan kelembapan permintaan luaran, malah menunjukkan tekanan struktur yang semakin ketara ke atas sektor perdagangan Malaysia. Walaupun kita tengok macam Nina katakan tadi penurunan 2% dan 5% tidak begitu banyak, tapi kalau kita tengok nilai itu kalau kita comparekan atau kita bandingkan pada tahun lalu, ianya lebih banyak perubahan dan ini bukan lagi dianggap sebagai turun naik bermusim tetapi berpotensi menjadi petunjuk awal kepada kitaran kelemahan yang lebih mendalam dalam sektor perdagangan luar. So kita tahu kelemahan ini bukan berlaku disebabkan satu faktor, ianya disebabkan oleh beberapa faktor, gabungan beberapa faktor. Antaranya kalau kita tengok permintaan yang semakin lemah daripada ekonomi utama, ketegangan geopolitikal yang berterusan dan juga peralihan dalam rantaian bekalan global yang dipacu oleh dasar reshoring dan friendshoring. Namun satu faktor kritikal yang semakin ketara adalah ketidaktentuan dasar fizikal, dasar perdagangan Amerika Syarikat, terutamanya cadangan tarif timbang balik oleh Presiden Trump. So ketidaktentuan ini tidak hanya memberi kesan kepada ekonomi Malaysia, malah kepada seluruh ekosistem perdagangan global. So saya melihat keadaan itu adalah kesan berlapis, iaitu yang pertama memang kita buat masa sekarang ni kalau tanya kepada pengguna, kita tidak melihat keadaan ataupun kesannya dirasai, tetapi bagi kepada peniaga-peniaga ataupun syarikat-syarikat yang berdagang, mereka sudah mula merasai penurunan permintaan ataupun penurunan kontrak daripada pembeli ataupun pengimport. So apa yang kita boleh lihat, banyak syarikat nasional, multinasional dan juga pengimport antarabangsa, dia mula mengambil pendekatan tunggu dan lihat, wait and see, menangguhkan tempahan baru dan juga mengurangkan inventory serta memperlahankan aktiviti pengeluaran bagi mengelakkan risiko ketidakpastian kos dan juga peraturan baru. So kita mula-mula tengok kesan kepada syarikat punya permintaan ataupun perdagangan, dan syarikat akan mengurangkan inventory ataupun mengurangkan jumlah pekerjaan, jumlah masa bekerja. So tiada tenaga buruh baru yang diambil. So ianya akan mengurangkan penggunaan tenaga buruh. Dan seterusnya, sekiranya kesan ini memberi tekanan kepada akaun syarikat, ianya akan menyebabkan profit berkurangan dan seterusnya akan menyebabkan jumlah pekerja akan dibuang. Dan keadaan ini boleh dilihat sekiranya pendapatan korporat suku kedua pada tahun ini menunjukkan penurunan yang signifikan. So kesan berganda ini kalau kita tengok Ianya melemahkan momentum ekspor Malaysia. So khususnya dalam sektor elektrik dan elektronik, minyak masak, minyak kelapa sawit dan juga produk pembuatan. So kesan berganda ini kalau kita lihat penurunan ekspor termasuk kemerosotan kebimbangan dagangan, kemerosotan imbangan dagangan, penurunan pelaburan swasta dan juga penggunaan kapasiti kilang yang lebih rendah yang boleh membawa kepada penyusutan dalam pengambilan pekerja yang saya katakan tadi. So kita boleh lihat 2 bulan berturut-turut penurunan ekspor bukan sekadar amaran tetapi satu isyarat bahawa risiko luaran sedang mengukur dan memerlukan perhatian dasar yang lebih strategik.
Itu adalah antara faktor utama melihat kepada ketidaktentuan fiskal oleh Amerika Syarikat, terutamanya daripada segi pelaksanaan tarif yang telah memberi kesan langsung kepada syarikat, kepada organisasi yang berdagang ini yang mungkin akan kurangkan profit mereka dan kurangkan lagi penggunaan tenaga buruh yang sejurusnya membawa kepada pemberhentian tenaga buruh itu sendiri. Dan kita akan melihat kepada keadaan ini lebih ketara dalam pendapatan korporat sekiranya menurun dengan lebih ketara lagi. Namun ia bukan amaran tetapi isyarat di mana risiko global memerlukan dasar yang lebih tegas dan lebih stabil untuk menangani perkara ini. Melihat kepada situasi ini dan saya akan beralih kepada FBM KLCI yang telah mencecah paras 1,500 dalam konteks masa. Apa maksud ini sendiri?
Okey, kita tahu bahawa paras 1,500 memberi makna yang besar dalam konteks pasaran semasa kerana ini bukan sahaja menjadi paras penanda aras psikologi pelabur institusi tetapi juga mencerminkan ketidaktentuan yang semakin meningkat dalam landscape geopolitikal dan juga perdagangan global. So kalau kita tahu, kalau kita tengok pada tahun 2024, FBM KLCI secara relatifnya stabil dan didagangkan dalam Julai 1620 hingga 1670. Tapi sekarang pada hari Jumaat yang lepas kita menghampiri 1,500 iaitu 1,502 menunjukkan tahun 2024 keyakinan pelabur terhadap pemulihan ekonomi domestik dan aliran masuk dana asing yang berterusan. Itu tahun 2024. Tapi 2025 yang saya katakan tadi, suasana berubah secara drastik apabila Donald Trump mengumumkan cadangan timbal balik yang mengenakan tarif asas sebanyak 10% ke atas semua import ke Amerika Syarikat. Walaupun kita tahu 10% itu kalau kita bandingkan dengan 24% yang dicadangkan adalah lebih rendah, tetapi 10% adalah tarif import yang tertinggi dalam masa 100 tahun di Amerika Syarikat. So sentimen global dia tergugat dan hampir semua indeks utama dunia mengalami jualan panik yang kita boleh lihat selepas hari raya pada bulan 4 hari itu, iaitu kita boleh lihat FBM KLCI jatuh mendadak sehingga paras sekitar 1,400 pada awal April. So kalau kita tengok dia berlaku peningkatan, rebound secara pantas. Yang kita lihat adalah pemulihan teknikal. So menjelang 14 Mei, kalau kita tengok FBM KLCI melonjak semula kepada paras 1,583 hasil belian semula dan juga aliran masuk dana asing dalam jangka masa pendek. Tapi kalau kita tengok keadaan 1,583 itu tidak bertahan. Indeks kembali susut secara berperingkat sehingga ditutup pada minggu lepas iaitu 1,502 mencerminkan hakikat bahawa pelabur kekal berhati-hati terhadap risiko makro yang belum reda. So keadaan menjadi lebih kompleks apabila konflik Iran-Israel tercetus dan juga potensi penlibatan langsung Amerika Syarikat untuk menyokong Israel. Ini menambahkan ketidaktentuan geopolitika yang boleh mengganggu kestabilan serantau dan juga global. So sebagai antara pengeluar utama minyak dunia, Iran, ketegangan membabitkan Iran menyebabkan harga minyak hampir melonjak hampir 15% pada hari pertama sebelum menyusut kepada 12% dan sekaligus dia meningkatkan risiko inflasi dan menekankan unjuran kos operasi hampir ke semua syarikat. So oleh itu paras 1,500 ini bukan semestinya mencerminkan kekuatan asas ekonomi tetapi pemulihan perlu dilakukan sekiranya kita lihat 1,500 ini melepasi menurun ianya akan menyebabkan jualan panik, dan itu adalah sangat penting bagi semua pelabur untuk kekal rasional dan tidak mengambil keputusan yang impulsif untuk menjual saham mereka.
Dengan suasana semasa, adakah pengukuhan ringgit juga memberi kesan positif ataupun sebaliknya kepada pasaran? Berbakikan 2 minit, Sidik mungkin boleh ringkaskan.
Okey, kalau kita tengok ringgit mengukur, dia sepatutnya dia memberi kesan yang positif, tetapi dalam keadaan sekarang dia memberi kesan yang bercampur-campur sebab kita tengok pasaran saham dan juga prestasi korporat dan juga geopolitik. So dari sudut makro, ringgit mengukur dia membantu mengurangkan kos import bahan mentah dan inflasi. So ianya positif kepada sektor pengguna, utility dan juga syarikat berasaskan domestik. Tapi kalau kita tengok untuk pengeksport seperti syarikat E&E, sarung tangan dan juga minyak sawit, ringgit yang lebih kuat mengecilkan hasil apabila pendapatan dalam dolar ditukar kepada ringgit. So ini membolehkan menyebabkan margin keuntungan terjejas, terutamanya bagi syarikat yang tidak melaksanakan lindung nilai mata wang secara aktif. So dalam situasi permintaan global yang lembab, yang kita tahu sekarang ni semua orang mengurangkan, semua pedagang mengurangkan ekspor mereka, so nilai ringgit yang mengukur memberi kesan yang ketara kepada pengeksport Malaysia. So secara keseluruhan, kalau saya boleh katakan, pengukuhan ringgit dalam konteks masa memberi sokongan kepada sektor domestik sahaja, tetapi menambahkan cabaran yang lebih hebat kepada sektor ekspor.
Baik, sudah tentu apa yang telah dikongsikan oleh Sidik memberi jelas, memberi satu perkongsian untuk melihat kepada para pelabur terutamanya, adakah patut mereka pegang, beli atau jual. Sudah tentu ini adalah perkara atau komponen utama yang perlu teliti. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Muhammad Sidik Jantan, merupakan Ketua Penyelidikan Pelaburan UOB Kayhian Wealth Advisor, dan kita akan teruskan dengan perkembangan AWANI International. We head now to St. Petersburg, Russia, where the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum closed its curtain last Saturday. AWANI leads editor Najib Aroff is on the ground with Russia's Minister of Energy, Sergei Tzvov, to talk about how is Russia positioning itself in the global energy market amid shifting alliances and ongoing sanctions.
Thank you, Studio. I'm here at the SPIEF 2025, organized by Ross Congress Foundation, and where Russia's energy minister has just concluded a key panel session on the future of global energy. This is a very timely topic and one of the key focus right here in SPIEF 2025, given that we are currently facing and Russia currently facing the economic isolation and economic sanction, and at the same time we have the geopolitical tensions that has caused the oil price to spike in the global arena. And also, of course, I asked him, the minister, of how Russia is positioning itself in a world where basically energy flows are being redirected, and at the same time alliances are shifting and demand from Asia and also the global south is rising. Here's what he had to say.
Мы сейчас вынуждены сами создавать технологии, потому что раньше мы использовали технологии, которые разработал коллективный Запад. Не по нашей вине нас лишили доступа к этим технологиям. И у нас благодаря этому открылись новые возможности. Мы эти технологии стали разрабатывать сами. Уже более 80% всех технологий, которые на сегодня известны в мире и применяются в энергетическом секторе, Россия уже владеет этими технологиями. Мы поставили перед собой задачу добиться 100% владения всеми технологиями.
So there you have it. Russia is using this moment basically not to just maintain its position in the global energy market, but also to transform itself into a fully self-reliant energy technology powerhouse. From St. Petersburg, Najib Aroff reporting with Rizal Rahim and Linda Salim for AWANI International.
Ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Kumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup.
Boleh ke tu?
Macam abang buat apa kat sini ya?
Abang betul-betul ikhlas. Nak jaga Noha lagi abang punya awal. Kita kahwin.
Kau dah janji kan? Kau takkan jatuh cinta dengan Noha?
Mak bapak kamu sendiri tak setuju. Noha pun berhak untuk bagi.
Kau memang dah plan dari awal kan? Kau nak balas dendam ke Noha kan?
Abang akan betulkan balik keadaan. Dia bukan syurga. Di Astro Ria dan Astro Go. Bersedia untuk tingkatkan kemahiran badminton anda? Camp Badminton Astro kini dibuka untuk kanak-kanak berumur 10 hingga 12 tahun. Daftar secara online dengan akaun Astro anda dan pilih camp untuk dihadiri. Berlatih dengan jurulatih profesional dan berpeluang untuk dipilih menyertai latihan eksklusif di Thailand. Daftar sekarang melalui laman web kami.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
As Malaysia gears out for a significant shift in its tax landscape, businesses and consumers need to prepare for the expanded sales and service tax SST set to take effect on 1 July 2025, announced in Budget 2025 on 18 October 2024. This expansion marks a pivotal move to strengthen Malaysia's fiscal framework under the Madani government, ensuring sustainable revenue to fund essential public services. With new goods and services now taxable, the changes will impact businesses in their pricing, compliance and operations across multiple sectors. And talking about the SST expansion and revision, I welcome you, our guest ready on the set is Harvinder Singh, the Council Member, Chartered Tax Institute of Malaysia. I want to say thank you very much, Harvinder, for joining me. Especially since the announcement, we have been covering this exclusively to understand from a consumer and even from the business perspective. Firstly, talking about the revision and the expansion of SST, how do you see this as an important step to strengthen countries' fiscal resilience and even achieving the fiscal deficit target?
Thank you. Firstly, Nina, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Well, essentially, the idea is to strengthen the country's fiscal position by having increased revenues as well as widening the tax base. And this is important to improve the creditworthiness of the country, to boost the investor confidence, which is important for long-term sustainability, of course. And there is a need, obviously, to do the debt management with increased revenues. That will be a lot more achievable. And it is the commitment of the country, of the government, to basically reduce the deficit as well. So all these are geared towards that. And when you talk about SST, you can't escape the comparison of the discussion.
Correct.
GST. And fundamentally, for GST, basically all services are subject to, the tax, GST. But you've got things like zero-rated and exempt services as well. Whereas SST is based on a prescribed list. So it's not covering everything, all and sundry at the moment. And the idea is to get from, this currently with this expansion, we've seen the list of taxable items growing from about 1,000 to 4,000 subcodes. And the exempted items have been reduced by about 70%. So the idea is actually to widen the scope, to bridge the gap in terms of what GST collections could have been, and what we are currently able to achieve under SST. So that's the main driver for this need to have this expanded scope of services for SST.
This is some of the impact that probably the people could not feel it yet, but we know there's a benefit for the country and ultimately will go back to the people.
Yes.
And can the targeted approach help mitigate the potential impact on inflation or even consumer spending in the future? What are some of the things that probably that businesses or consumer felt like, oh, probably this is the things that I have to comply, but this is not things I expected for the effect?
Yeah. Well, actually, the targeted approach is meant to try to cushion the impact of the expansion of SST right, on the cost of goods, etc. And so the idea is it is targeted because basic items, essential items are not being imposed with SST. And as you go, into premium and discretionary goods, it is at 10%. So if you talk about racing bicycle, which can cost up to about 100,000, I've been told, right? It's at 10%. So the idea is targeted. However, basically when it comes to the feeling of the businesses out there, I think the impression or the feeling is that there would be an increased cost of doing business, an increase in the cost of goods as well, because ultimately the prices will have to be, eventually it's going to cost more to engage service providers, and then you're going to pass on that cost to the consumers as well. I think there is also, at this point in time, it's still a bit early. There's a lot of misconception about some of the types of items that are subject to sales tax, for example. I think there was this bit of, issue on local fruits being subject to sales tax as well. I think there's a misconception there. I think that's been clarified. Essentially, it is on certain imported fruits, if you talk about mangoes, apples, mandarin oranges. And again, these are not exactly premium items, right? These are normal, common foods that are typically taken by, consumed by most people. Yeah. So the government, I think a couple of days ago in the papers, they've also said that, okay, we will do a review and see whether there's a need for us to amend this list of items that are subject to SST. So it's an ongoing thing. And I think the government is basically looking at wanting to appease, right, most parties. But there is a need actually to expand the scope of SST. I think the expected increased collections with this expanded SST is at about 10 billion ringgit for the current year. If I recall correctly, I think the collections that came in last year for SST were about 47 or 50 billion. So we're talking about 60 billion or so currently, the expectation with this expansion. With GST, some of the figures that I've heard being passed around or discussed is in the region of about 80 billion. And so there is a bit of a gap there that needs to be managed. So there is a need. And I think the Prime Minister also in recent interviews said that we have to obviously collect money in order to be able to provide, for the various expenditure requirements of the country.
Correct, especially taking what happened in the global context right now.
Yes.
Probably we need to take a look more on the fiscal position. In your view, does the SST have the potential to remain as a progressive and equitable tax while ensuring sustainable revenue for the country?
Yeah, so if you talk about equitable or progressive tax, the idea is that those that are not so well to do don't have to pay so much, whereas you collect from the orang maha kaya or some of the better people in a better position. And that's the idea of currently the way it has been approached by the government, where they've done a study, because SST is actually applied as a single stage tax. And it has the effect of tax on tax, cascading effect at every stage of the supply chain. So with that, basically, ultimately, the cost of that item can become a lot higher. And GST is actually doesn't have that kind of inefficiency. So that's a concern. And this effects of the cascading tax on tax will be passed on to the consumers, and essentially the prices may not be so transparent, and this can disproportionately affect the lower income taxpayers, and that is the issue that the government is trying to manage. And they've had MOF has had a lot of discussions with the industry players, with various parties, with the professional bodies, with our council as well, on how to manage this. So they've tweaked this with, for example, if we talk about rental income, right? Commercial properties, rental income is subject to service tax now. Only the landlord, the main landlord will charge to the tenant, the main tenant. When the main tenant charges to parties that are subtenants, there will be no imposition of service tax now. So it's not going to be cascading in that perspective. This is to manage the issues that have been there all this while with the imposition of service tax. There was a big issue last year when this was introduced for the logistic services. And there was a lot of furore, a lot of adverse feedback on that. So learning from that, MOF has basically had a lot of discussions. So the idea is to try to manage, right? GST is not something that's being looked at the moment. The Prime Minister has mentioned it again, reiterated that if at all, it will only be imposed once the economy is a lot more robust. We are, I think, chugging along quite nicely, but we are not quite there yet. That's the message. And also, the minimum wage needs to reach 4,000 ringgit. Currently, last year there was an increase from 1,005 to 1,007. That itself caused a lot of grief to many parties. So when we will achieve that 4,000 minimum wage is,
only then we can consider to implement the GST.
That is, when that happens and if that happens, that's the message at the moment. So currently the idea is to look at SST and try to manage it as best as possible. So whether it's equitable or not, it depends on how it is implemented. And that's the approach, that's the initiative from the government to try to make it as equitable as possible, which is why if we talk about essential items, 0%, discretionary premium items, it's a 10%. So it's progressive in that sense, but there are certain inefficiencies that need to be managed.
Help me understand also on this. Probably some may say that nobody wants tax, but we know it's how we implemented it. Maybe some say, GXC was much more clearer because we know it was direct to the consumer, but some may say that, SST, the review and the expansion of SST, we don't know if it's considered under value-added tax, VAT. Is it going to be straight to the consumer, or is it going to be to the exporter, and then ultimately exporter will decide to go to consumer? Help us understand within the SST, is it a direct to consumer, or is it a VAT? How do we consider all of this?
Well, actually, ultimately, these taxes essentially are to be borne by the consumers. It's just the issue of how along the supply chain, how it is managed.
Right.
So with SST, as I mentioned, the cascading effect makes it ultimately a lot more expensive. The GST, you have the input credits, right? So the incremental rise in the cost should be a lot more manageable compared to SST. That's essentially the issue, and it's a lot more efficient. GST plus, you'll be imposing it on all and sundry. Everybody plays their part in the payment of taxes. But because it affects everybody, that's where the concern of the government is that we don't want to overly burden, especially the lower income group.
That is very important. We don't want to add more burden to the lower income and the vulnerable group, especially. What do you see as the main challenge in implementing the new tax regime?
I think most, if you talk about companies, 90% of Malaysian companies are SMEs. And with SMEs, it's always the issue of resources and time constraints and making sure that your business is running well. It's operational issues that, essentially come into the picture. So they may lack the systems or the expertise or resources. And even if you do, put in those systems to correctly classify, to quantify, and to submit your SST returns correctly, It's a bit of a challenge. It requires effort. It will increase the cost of compliance. If you need to seek professional advice, there would be SST on some of these areas where in the past there was no SST. I think also the deadline that is given July 1st of July, for the imposition of SST on these expended items seems to be very tight for most parties. Of course, if you are providing these services, taxable services, just commencing to start supplying these services or those areas, then service tax will only start in September, so you still have time. Having said that, and understanding that yes, there is a bit of a tightness in the deadlines, the government is also saying that if you act in good faith and you try your best to impose and to implement the SST accordingly, they will waive the penalties, right, as long until 31st of December. So for this interim period, for the introduction of this expanded scope of SST, there is supposed to be no penalty, but the taxpayer has to show that they've acted in good faith. From that perspective.
Havinder, probably my last question. We did execute GST previously, and we don't have the GST, meanings that probably it was a failure. But we know that even though GST and SST, their main objective is to increase revenue, is to bring more, to improve creditworthiness of the country, as you mentioned, and for long-term sustainability and widen the scope. It's a different structure between SST and GST. But what can we learn from GST when we implement it previously? This is what we should do, or so this is the things that we should structure when we want to execute any other types of tax.
Well, I think I wouldn't say that GST was a failure. I think most businesses are actually requesting for GST to be reintroduced, right? And I think the reason why it switched was mainly because of the fact that it affects every individual, the consumers, everybody is affected, except in situations where the items in questions or the services in question are zero rated or tax exempt, which is a list of items, etc. So, but otherwise everybody is affected. So the idea behind GST, I think, was seen as being good. We have to increase the streams of revenue collection to rely on direct taxes alone on a continuous basis, to rely on Petronas subsidies. It's going to be an issue in the coming, going forward. So GST is or was seen as, the good consumption tax to impose. But due to various factors, it was, discontinued, and we went back to SST. I think what could perhaps be done with GST, or could have been done, is the rate could have been a little bit lower to start off, and then introduced, maybe gradually increase the rates in future.
All right. Thank you so much, Hafiz Said, the Council Member, Chartered Tax Institute of Malaysia. I'm sorry we're at the end of the session, but this is a very insight. I hope we can talk more in the future. Again, thank you very much. And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in astro.com across all social media platforms. And we're going to continue with World Economic Forum's top stories of the week.
The emerging economies are playing a critical role when it comes to energy transition. In fact, 80% of the growing demand is in the emerging economies. The challenge is that 90% of the investment, if you look at the last 5 years, really went more in the advanced economies and China. So here is the challenge we face, where growing demand is not matched by growing investment in emerging economies. China has moved dramatically in the index. Now China ranked 12 in the overall ranking and is also within the 5 top countries when it comes to the readiness, so to be ready to accelerate the transition in the coming year. A lot of the investment in clean energy, 40%, are going into China. So we really see a great progress and also a great outlook on the China energy transition. India is a very, very important country when it comes to energy transition and the energy demand growth, and it's encouraging to see the progress that have been done in the last year and in the last few years when it comes to energy equity, but also energy efficiency and strong regulation put in place that is giving us a positive outlook on what will happen in India in the coming years. Nigeria, as we all know, is the most populous country in Africa, and is also encouraging to see that in the last decade have effectively progressed from being 109 in our benchmarking 10 years ago to 61 now. There have been consistent and steady progress when it comes to clean cooking, but also infrastructure and investment in clean energy. Brazil is the best ranking country in Latin America and is the 15th around the world, so a very, very good ranking. This is thanks to improved in energy equity and also good and growing investment in clean energy. The investment in clean energy have been about 2 trillion in the last year, and this is very good, but not good enough. We need 5.6 trillion according to some calculation, and this is a big gap, and this gap is mainly in emerging economies, where with the exception of China, where a lot of investment is going, they are lacking of investment. So it's really important that going forward, more investment are coming in emerging economy, because that is where the biggest part of the demand will come from.
At this moment, heavy industry is relying on oil and gas to produce the daily products that we are using. And that's exactly what we want to tackle with Decarbon. We want to promote CO2 as new feedstock for chemical and petrochemical industry. But CO2 is a very inert material, and with the technology that we developed at Decarbon, we can make this inert molecule active again, so that industry can start utilizing CO2 instead of treating it as waste.
Ethylene is the world's most used petrochemical. It's used in pretty much all everyday products, from plastics to textile fibers to construction materials. And today it's made through a high temperature, highly emitting process, releasing hundreds of million tons of CO2 per year in the atmosphere. And so at Dioxycle, we have invented a novel process to make ethylene, not from fossil fuels, but using recycled carbon emission, water, and renewable electricity. And that way, we can abate the equivalent of 1 to 2% of the world's emission. main opportunity and incredible opportunity that Uplink helped us with is really allowing us to enter an ecosystem of champions, if I can say that, with industrial partners who are both extremely pragmatic, but also already convinced and already committed to the fact that fighting climate change is their #1 priority.
The ocean produces 50% of the global oxygen in the planet. It's not exactly 50% of what we breathe, that's important. It's 50% of what all life breathes in the planet. And it also absorbs 90% of excess heat. So it is extremely important for our life support systems. Prince of Ocean Action is a network of key champions from around the world that come from industry, from government, from civil society, and even individual people that have just left a huge mark on how we think about the ocean. And by bringing them together, what we have been able to do is to create that space at the highest level to position the ocean as a key priority.
Kerajaan Sabah komited melaksanakan pelbagai inisiatif secara menyeluruh untuk memelihara serta memperkasakan warisan budaya rakyat berbilang kaum di negeri itu.
Setakat Mei tahun ini, seramai 55,457 penerima di seluruh Sarawak telah menerima bantuan di bawah sistem e-bantuan JKM.
MEBS secara rasmi ditubuhkan. MEBS berperanan sebagai platform penyelarasan dan pelaksanaan dasar strategi ekonomi biru Sabah.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaustri. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now this week on analysis, we turn the spotlight on lighting up Sabah, energy, equity and opportunity. Now as a quick introduction overall, Sabah's energy story is shifting from shortage to strategy. By June 2025, the state is set to hit a 22% reserve margin, powered by new infrastructure like the 100-megawatt battery energy storage system and the Kimanis gas turbine. But the real transformation, that is in the shift towards renewables. With a 40% renewable energy target by 2030, major projects like the Ulupadas hydro plant and the vast solar potential are putting Sabah on the regional green energy map. Now add to that bold innovations in waste to energy, and Sabah isn't just building supply, it is reimagining sustainability. Still, the bigger question remains, can this transition also deliver equity, especially for rural and indigenous communities long left literally in the dark? Joining us now to unpack the path forward, Datuk Abdul Nasir, CEO of the Energy Commission of Sabah, or ECOS. Datuk Nasir, a very good morning. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you so much.
Datuk Nasir, let's start off a little bit with looking at the basics first, shall we? Now, Sabah Power Grid, as mentioned, is expected to achieve the target of at least 25% generation reserve margin soon. So how has that been made possible through the work of not only ECOS but other collaborative agencies? Tell us a little more about that.
Okay, Tamina, thank you for that question. Actually, that question is the most basic question has been asked by a lot of parties on it. So it is time for us to clarify on that. From the point of we have taken over the regulatory power of energy in Sabah, which is very recent.
That's right.
Only last year, January 2024, we came across a lot of rectification things that we have to do. And one of the reasons why we come across that situation is because I would call it a post-COVID recovery. Because a lot of projects, critical projects, which are supposed to be completed within a certain time frame was not able to be completed. So this is the time for us to actually rectify in a quick manner. So what we did to achieve that 25% rather quickly is to have quick fix solution through a fast-track interim solution. For example, the commissioning of rental concept of using diesel for now, because that will be one of the fastest means of getting the power as soon as possible, and extending some of the power plant that should be commissioned with the introduction of the supposed to be new power plant on stream. So what we did was to have this interim fast-track solution in place for a period only for 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's just for a temporary measure, just to get us to speed in accordance to the right generation reserve margin that we want to be. So with that, it will be replaced very quickly after 2 or 3 years with a permanent solution which is more sustainable and affordable. Example, gas power plant, you have mentioned just now, and battery energy storage system as well. So we are looking at achieving that 25% within third quarter of this year, inshallah. So with that, 25% will bring us to a more comfortable level. But 25% is actually an industrial standard for reserve margin. Just to have some explanation on reserve margin.
Yes,
it's like a generation capacity, spare capacity. So like any other machine, you need to have to cater for outages, be it scheduled or unscheduled outages. So you need to have that kind of margin to ensure, because the supply and the demand need to be served 24/7.
Correct.
So you have to have that comfortable margin in order to cater for those outages. So that's why we are going for that 25% as quickly as possible. And inshallah, we'll manage to achieve that by the third quarter of this year, Tamina.
Exactly. Now, that is, of course, the overall structure and strategy, Dato' Nasir, but at the same time, also, there is a gap for roughly around 200,000 packs in Sabah who are in basically unelectrified, as we call them. We'll get into that discussion as well, but I think I'd also like to integrate it, Dato', with looking at the fact that ECOS is also targeting 40% renewable energy by 2030. Tell us about the strategy towards achieving that, especially with regards to energy investment infrastructures, because that is going to be key.
Okay, 40% is a number that we want to achieve as a target. But actually, the whole holistic view here is to ensure that we have the right energy transition roadmap for Sabah. It's similar to NETA in Malaysia. So we have, this is the Sabah chapter. So achieving the ultimately the end goal is to have 80%, inshallah, within 70 to 80% of renewables in 2050. So before we get there, there will be in stages, achievement of certain milestone. So the first milestone, you mentioned correctly, is 40% in 2030. That is the first 5 years goal within that achievement. And to achieve that within the 5 years, it has to be a definitive plan. So that definitive plan come in the form of power development plan that has been mandated by the state government for us to go into sufficient and more permanent and also sustainable manner in generating power for Sabah. And it comes in the form of, I would say that if you categorize the significant element of generation resource there, it will be gas power plant, which is required also to ensure we have sufficient baseload demand fulfillment. And the other one would be the solar, which we have done prior to this, and we will continue doing it within the next 5 years horizon, and also hydro. So all this, if you...
A good energy mix, which is sustainable according to what's available.
Exactly. So with regards to hydro and solar, there will be some intermittency. These are variable renewable energy.
Absolutely.
So you have to couple that with battery energy storage system, so to make it more firm. So with a combination of these four elements, that's how we actually introduce those resources to be in place within a certain years in order to achieve the 40% of renewable energy against the whole generation mix. So that's coming from the hydro and the solar with energy storage. So that is until 2030. But we don't stop there, definitely, because the whole journey is towards energy transition by 2040 or even beyond.
Yes, 50 years ago.
Exactly. So that's where the energy transition plan as a whole comes into play, whereby we are quite optimistic in terms of gaining more ground on renewable energy, not only from solar. Of course, you can have more solar, but you need to have energy storage at the same time.
Yes, correct.
So we have to be very sensitive to on cost impact of having energy storage at the back of the renewable. So we're going for a lot of hydro as well. So we can see a lot of element of hydro within post-2030 until 2040. And how we are going to achieve this is that we have done a Sabah Hydro Development Master Plan that we have completed end of last year. And it shows there's a great potential of hydro development for Sabah. It's more than 2,000 megawatt, in fact. But we have to do it in stages as well.
Of course, it has to be rolled out in
Exactly,
context.
it has to be rolled out.
And from there, Dato', may I also then go into how ECOS is also being sure that indigenous communities and those in remote areas are not only consulted, but they are also part of this overall benefits from such projects which are going to be rolled out in stages across Sabah.
You're right, because when we touch on hydro development, definitely hydro is at remote location, right? So with that remote location, it will involve a lot of rural communities. So what we do is that we ensure that first we have to do a sufficient engagement with them.
That's right.
Secondly, you have to have a buying in from them. That's very important.
An informed level of consent too. Yes.
Not only to be informed, but as well as to be involved, to partake in the development as well, because they have the local expertise and knowledge of the area. They would be also be available there to actually continue with the maintenance and operation to a certain level, or whatever they can actually partake in the full development of the hydro system. So it has to be a coexistent concept, that we have this project, a large project in this locality.
Correct.
You have to involve the local community there as well. To make
exactly, because that in that way you can also have not just ownership stakes but long-term guarantee of land right protections.
And then by partaking, they will gain the benefit immediately, right?
Absolutely. Now, of course, if we could go into looking a little bit at perhaps big global players. You've got Envision, for example, top wind turbine manufacturers and developers. They're investing in Sabah, which is very encouraging news. That's exciting. Can you also share a little bit more about perhaps local players in the energy decision-making arena who are also upcoming that ECOS wants to also help to promote?
Okay, we have more of those, not only Envision, but a few other more. I think because of transparency and good governance in the state government of Sabah on energy development, it gives a lot of attraction to foreign entity to come in. And for me, it's important to have this mix of foreign expertise together with the local capability that you have to build upon. You have to start somewhere. But actually what we did was for a project of large-scale solar recently, we did a bidding round for the large-scale solar in Sabah only last year. What we did was to ensure local participation and benefit is guaranteed. There's a mandatory requirement for that bid to actually have local content.
That's right. So basically your local procurement ecosystems, they are being enforced now.
Yeah. So in terms of equity, in terms of the content of the project cost itself, it has to have local content there. So and then we do have capable local outfit to actually conduct that to take up the challenge, and then that has been quite successful, I may say. That all the 15 awarded bidders has that local content in place as well.
So there's that local benefit mandate.
Exactly.
Perhaps if it could even be formalized in the state legislature, that would further encourage such cooperation.
True. I think that it has there is some mentioning in our enactment to ensure that we give a fair approach of all energy projects development for the local benefit as well. So actually it is there, but correctly pointed by you, it has to be in a regulated form and guidelines to ensure that. But for now, it's based on practice. So it's a testing ground. We see where we are. Then we have the capability. We will escalate that into rules.
Yes, exactly. And are definitely governed by a rules-based ecosystem. If we could briefly look at a couple of the major projects, Datuk Nasir, such as the Upper Padas hydropower plant, the promised growth around it. How do you ensure that local ecosystems and communities are also being highlighted to be protected rather than just being a part of the overall ecosystem?
Okay, that's a good question. Like any other project, like any other project, major project involving the environment and all that, it's a compulsory requirement to have a comprehensive environmental and social impact assessment. That's definitely in. I mean, that's given. But on top of that, for Upper Padas, there is also we did something additional to that.
Right.
To ensure that we engage, like I mentioned just now, the community early. We ensure there are objection and issue related to compensation and all that has been catered early. So we get the site ready before even we want to start the project. So that's very important. And as I mentioned as well, in terms of, it's a storage dam project. So in a storage dam project, one of the requirements to ensure the environmental of the river condition is to have a minimum environmental flow. For example, you can't just have a dam project and stop the river flowing.
And progress without displacements is possible. I think this is what has been proven. And
then that's a very interesting point that you made there, because the reason why we choose that site of Padas is basically because there is doesn't involve any relocation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the conversation so far, Datuk Nasir. We do take a short break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight, focusing on Sabah and energy equity.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tamina Kausji, and today it's a very inclusive discussion on looking at Sabah and energy equity. Datuk Nasir, so good, jumping right back into the conversation. Now, waste to energy sounds like a wonderful, bold and timely innovation, given that, of course, we want to be environmentally conscious. Could this be the key to powering interior parts of Sabah more sustainably? And how soon does ECOS hope to expect and see pilot projects happening on the ground, waste to energy?
Okay. Waste to energy in Sabah context will be mainly the significant part of waste to energy for Sabah will be the bioenergy, which is the biomass, biogas. Those are generated waste from palm oil industry, which you know Sabah has a lot of. So I think the hidden, I would call it a hidden gem, which is there's a potential about more than 800 megawatt, which is for Sabah is quite large.
Very valuable.
Very valuable as well. And also it will be also complementing a circular economy as well. And then to ensure that we have sufficient power available at the east coast of Sabah, because most of the bioenergy potential will be in the east coast of Sabah, where you don't have gas, natural gas availability there. So that means there's a lot of multiple benefit that we should focus and insist on happening. So the thing about that, there are some challenges on that that we're trying to overcome. But what happened recently is that a game changer for me, that the state government has had this policy implemented, that all biomass, there's some restriction in terms of exporting biomass outside.
Right. So it has to stay within the state borders.
It has to stay within. So that means we have hopefully sufficient amount to make things happen for bioenergy in Sabah, because that was the first problem that we faced, which is not insufficient biomass waste.
For it to be industrially viable.
So that's one. And secondly, in terms of cost, to make sure, and also in terms of logistics, it's something we're working on. And then we are progressing on that. What the government also did was to appoint an aggregator. A local aggregator is a GLC to ensure that the transportation, the collection center, and the pre-treatment of the biomass is done in equitable and according to the requirement that we need. So I think we are going there. It's a work in progress, I would say.
And also ensuring that its waste to energy is not only urban-centric, but also perhaps involves local councils, maybe women-led cooperatives, which are very common when it comes to social enterprises in Sabah.
So that's very important also, because the biomass potential is actually at the rural area. So at the east coast and rural area. So that's where it's important. But I just want to add one more.
Yes, please.
How important is this bioenergy in terms of environmental impact? Because what is it actually to the environment is that the waste from the palm oil, the biomass, will emits methane. And we know that methane is quite harmful greenhouse gases. So actually it's a killing two birds in one stone, while having energy, renewable, as well as demethanation agenda for Sabah, which is complementing the nation.
In a circular economy model as well.
So that's basically my take on waste to energy. The significant part will be on the bioenergy part.
Absolutely. Now, moving along to discussion, Datuk Nasir, Sabah is also building a new gas power plant in Kimanis, while also aiming for more renewables at the same time. So let's talk about ECOS's perspective on this fossil fuel investment within Malaysia's broader scope, larger climate commitments.
So I think we have to have a balanced approach. I mentioned just now, the energy transition must be done in a just manner. We have to take into account the security of supply, the reliability of it, the affordability of it. And also, of course, at the same time, we also in tune with the sustainability and to the environment. So that's why it's progressively we are increasing the renewable energy while trying to saturate the gas, fossil fuel. We don't have any coal plant in Sabah. We only have fossil fuel in terms of gas. So for us, gas is a transitional fuel. Like any
Wonderful. Yes, the transitional approach rather than entrenching it as part of the energy mix, right?
Can't be done overnight.
True.
And we have to take into account all the balanced approaches. So it is, it's true that we have some new gas power plant online, but we also ensure that the usage of gas is up to the minimum. And why we do that? Not only because of the environmental issue, but also on the economic development issue for Sabah. So the natural gas, all this while has been used mainly for power. But now we are seeing a lot of interest of industrialization uptake in Sabah. So a lot of this needs the natural gas to ensure that industrialization of Sabah also being taken care of. So that's our focus as well.
Exactly.
Power as well as industrialization agenda for Sabah.
Very true, because I think it's also about Sabah's future energy economy being more resilient and not locking all the assets in fossil fuels alone.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So definitely a lot to ponder about, but thank you for that overall introduction. Now, we know, of course, energy projects create jobs, Dato' Nasser, but are they reaching the right people in Sabah in so far? And how does ECOS hope to ensure that there is long-term skilled employment, particularly for local youth, beyond the mostly short-term contracts that are currently available?
Okay, I think if you read through our Sabah Energy Roadmap and Master Plan 2040, which we crafted back in 2023, before we were even the regulator for power at the time. So in the Master Plan, one of the important enabler is the human resource capital, capacity development. So understanding that, there's a lot of focus on that as well, to ensure that we have sufficient manpower and expertise to actually sustain the plan that we have developed. One of the aspects that we did in terms of intervention, something extra we did, was to engage an institute, Latihan Technical Institute, ILTP in Sabah, owned by state government, and become our, we call it Tibet Angkat lah. Basically we nurture them to make sure they have sufficiency in terms of the module with regards to the power and gas.
Locally suited TVET, yes.
Suited, and then also at the same time facilitate them to get the right infra, and also to ensure the most important aspect is also ensure employability at the end of the day.
Yes.
Where they are basically the one who fill all the gaps. So Sabah is actually developing that. At the same time, we have to get from outside to ensure we have sufficient human capital capability, but we have a program to actually build up our indigenous local expertise as well. So I think that plays a very major role in terms of sustaining what we have developed.
Yes, exactly. Could we perhaps dig a little bit deeper into that? Now, when it also comes to ensuring equitable job access, one part of it is looking at technical school graduates. Are there any also efforts perhaps to upskill and ensure that Sabahan women are also part of these programs?
Definitely. I mean, a lot of the ILTP students that I went, quite a lot of them also are female.
Right, okay.
And then even in ECOS, I think we have more than 30% women actually. So, I mean, this is something that we have to look into in terms of equitability for all across spectrum and factors of equitability, gender as well as race and all that. So I think it's important because we have this mixture and this diversity.
Exactly, and that also helps to ensure that income development is across all boards. Can we move into perhaps what kind of incentives are existing or perhaps ECOS would like to propose in the near future, especially for companies to retain local hires beyond just the construction phase of projects?
Okay, what we did was, as a regulator, I mean, we can always encourage, involvement of for the companies to engage local employees. But also we were looking at making it probably a regulation to say that when there's a contractor to renew their license and all that, they must employ local Sabahan, because actually it's good for them. Because the cost, imagine the cost of employing local compared to getting
yes, exactly.
Cheaper,
importing
right?
workers.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's one. Second is the knowledge, local knowledge of the local employee there is better, and also I would say that it's aligned to our agenda as well to develop local expertise. So I mean, we're working along and collaborating together with the industry players as well in the energy sector.
Exactly.
To ensure that happen.
And I think hopefully, because we're not just looking at Sabah alone, but I think we're also looking at transitioning into the green energy economy across Southeast Asia. Exactly. So that could mean in the near future, perhaps skilled Sabahans who have been trained in maybe technicians, coders, solar installers. We will actually be the ones exporting them somewhere, right? Yep. And perhaps to round out the entire discussion, Dr. Nasser, let's talk about how Sabah could be a model for a fair, sustainable energy transition in Southeast Asia. and of course one that benefits naturally Sabahans first.
Definitely. I think one of the significant exercise that will bring us towards the Southeast Asia arena will be the ASEAN Power Grid. Why I say that? Because the geographical location of Sabah is quite strategic.
Very strategic.
Very
yes.
strategic. We are actually bordering with Indonesia and Philippines and Brunei as well, not too far. And I think the other project that actually, as a starting point to make that happen, is the interconnection that we are going soon to have and commission with Sarawak. Because Sarawak is also have excess energy that they can produce and probably selling abroad. So Sabah having the right infrastructure will be, poised to be central in that agenda as well for Philippines or even Kalimantan. We heard the PMX mentioning about that recently, about the APG.
Yes, that's right.
Malaysia would like to lead in terms of, making that to happen. The thing about APG as well, besides having a resilient network system, it's also giving more avenue for expanding renewable energy market. Because renewable energy, like I mentioned, is intermittent. Probably you have it during a certain time. The other country might don't have it at that particular point in time. This is
That's
where
right.
you
It depends on who is
complement each other. Exactly. And renewable energy is a waste if you don't actually use it because it's always there. It's in excess. So I think this is also one of the impetus.
And perhaps some of ECOS's thoughts around tariff equity and ensuring that tariff rates in particular, regardless of overall national restructuring, it is definitely kept affordable for rural people in Sabah.
Exactly. So I'm thinking rural and both urban as well, because when you focus on renewable energy, there's no element of subsidy there. That's one thing. And then it's not fluctuate with the geopolitical situation that we are having now. And then when you talk about renewable energy, it's basically also adapting that concept of microgrid. Renewable means sustainable means community operation and maintenance led for the rural folks as well. So we are actually doing it in tandem for both urban and rural. So I think inshallah, I think we are basically on track. Because the plan actually is already laid down, and then the state government also committed. We have an intervention committee as well being commissioned to ensure that this happens.
Absolutely, and I think overall, when it comes to the energy landscape in Sabah, currently Sabah has the very unique opportunity to perhaps pilot Southeast Asia's first state-level just energy transition framework.
Exactly, yeah.
And we wish you and your team at the ECOS all the very best with that. Thank you very much for your time today, Dato. So, lighting up Sabah isn't just about energy access, it's also about energy justice. When equity drives our grids, we don't just power homes, we power futures. That's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. We'll see you all next week with more economic analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead. I'm Melangkaui, signing off for now.